Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to colinslaststand.com. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast. This is episode 130. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined today, as always, by Chris Raygun. Chris, how are you?
I am well. Well as a bell.
Wow.
You know, that's a phrase, right? Probably. I don't know. Somewhere that's a phrase, I'm sure.
I didn't know bells were well, but it is now a phrase. I'm surprised it's not a phrase if it's not. It sounds like some sort of British shit. You know, like some sort of, I'm well as a bell, you know? And then Dustin. How are you, Dustin Furman?
Oh, I'm doing well. You know, it's very snowy up here in the Northeast. And so it's just got a nice cozy feel right now. It's very snowy, but I'm nice and tucked away inside.
Tucked away safely?
Yes.
Good.
I mean, for now, who knows what could happen just honestly at any point. So.
Yeah, sure. Anything can happen at any moment.
That's right.
We have down here in Virginia, it's just warm enough where it's raining, but it's like a freezing rain. So
right. So everyone's freaking out then, since it's just far enough south. Everyone's panicking.
Yeah, whenever it snows here, everyone just freaks out.
Right.
So even though it snows every year, so you think that they would be used to it, but nonetheless, we're coming to you hot with episode 130 of Sacred Symbols, our weekly PlayStation podcast. We put it up live, early. That's not going to happen. We're never going to put up the show live.
Yeah, no, never.
Jesus Christ. Put it up early on Patreon each and every week, patreon.com/colinslaststand. 3 days early, ad-free access to our show. You can also support it on free feeds like tens of thousands of you do, and on YouTube as well. Thank you so much for your kindness and your support. Now, if I'm looking at the calendar properly, and I think I am, this will go live, let's see. Yeah, around Christmas. So, you know, the week of Christmas for Patreon, and then a little after for everyone else on the free feed. So Merry Christmas to everyone out there. Hope you, or Happy Hanukkah.
It's a very different kind of Christmas, huh?
Yeah.
Like, because I don't know about you, but like it feels nothing like Christmas. I don't know, maybe that's because I haven't been like out and hearing like, you know, the same old Christmas songs on repeat over and over again every time I step into a retail establishment, but like,
sure.
It doesn't feel anything like December to me. No.
California always kind of removed the Christmas spirit for me, just based on being there, and the weather never really changes and stuff, but this year, obviously, is especially strange. Now, are you following? In California, you can't even like leave your house, can you?
No, yeah, you can. You can walk around, and there are businesses still open. It's just you can't. If there's like a maximum capacity for certain stores, and there are no restaurants that you can like dine in or dine outside at. Like, so everything's kind of takeout, basically.
That's good. I mean, that's fair enough. Dustin, you're coming here soon, so that will be
right.
Actually, by the time this goes live, you will have already been here. So how was your trip?
True. Yeah. Yeah. I was a little worried because right now there's just this crazy, the snow is okay around here, but like middle of Pennsylvania, it's supposed to be like a foot or more. But I'm thinking by the time I'm driving, it's going to be fine. You would think. But yeah, so I'm excited. Lots of exciting things happening.
We definitely
have yet to reveal.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to the next few weeks where we can start to unleash 2.0. But until then, I thought we would do a couple of evergreen episodes of Sacred Symbols. We didn't want to miss a week. We never miss a week with our shows. And there's really not going to be any newsworthy stuff to talk about likely during these 2 weeks over the holidays. Plus, I want to give everyone time off. And I want time off too. So I thought I'd do a couple of these kinds of episodes. We did these last year, I think, too.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Or similar ones. Today's episode of Sacred Symbols is dedicated to just kind of our favorite moments of 2020, or the most memorable moments, let's say, of 2020. They don't necessarily have to be favorite, but I kind of gave the audience a rule set when I solicited their questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, and ideas, which can be submitted on Patreon, as many of you know, patreon.com/colinslaststand. And I gave them rules in terms of, well, let's keep it within the realm of PlayStation, but for everyone, for the three of us, I thought we would open it up a little bit more, and so we focused, had the audience focus a little more, but we already know what's expected of us here, so
yeah,
I feel like we'll have a nice little mixture of things. So what I had the boys do for the audience is just I had Dustin and Chris both make a list of the 5 kind of moments that they wanted to talk about this year. I made a list of 5 as well. They're in no particular order, I don't think, for any of us. And then we'll pepper in a bunch of your inquiries from Patreon as well as we round out this show. Dustin, you're the guest here today, so I figure why not let you go first?
Sure. Are we doing number 1 first, or are we going from 5 and then going to the most important?
Well, like I said, for me, it was in no particular order,
Okay.
so you can say them in any order you want. No one is going to know what the order is here on the list except for the 3 of us.
Sure. I'll start with the least PlayStation one that I have and that I put as number 5, and that is Valve creates a true AAA VR game. And so a lot of people know, of course, Half-Life Alyx. It just won VR Game of the Year at the Game Awards. And this was just really cool for someone like me who's a fan of VR. I have PlayStation VR, I have Oculus Quest, and the consumer version 1 of the Rift. And it's been interesting to see this industry grow. But what's been frustrating for a lot of VR fans is that we've seen very few companies really dive in all the way. And I think even Sony, in a way, hasn't really put their money where their mouth is in a lot of ways. I mean, sure, we've gotten some excellent VR games from Sony. Obviously, Astrobot comes to mind and some other stuff. But what I have to give my props to Valve in that not only did they make an amazing big budget VR game that's absolutely incredible with Half-Life Alyx, but they made it with their biggest franchise that they have under their belt, which is just, to me, probably, I don't know if to say was scary for them, because they obviously, if it totally failed, it didn't matter because they're Valve, but it definitely could have hurt the brand of Half-Life. And so to see them go in all the way and make this game that is really, really incredible, unlike any VR game that I've ever played, was just really exciting. And I hope that it goes on to inspire other developers to do big VR games, whether that's Sony or other big publishers with one of their big properties.
Yeah, so this is a really good selection, and Chris, I know you have a lot to say about this game as well. So, I'll kick it over to you.
No, yeah, I this was one of the first things that came to mind, and I was actually thinking, like, when I was putting together the list, it's like, oh, can I even? It's not PlayStation oriented, is it? Because I don't think we had gone over the rule set about it before, so I was like, should I say that? But yeah, no, it's a huge thing that really, I think, sadly, only Valve can do, because they're in such a unique position with, just Steam and the fact that pretty much, like, they can't make anything that does poorly, because it almost doesn't matter. Like, they could make a game that sells 2 copies and they would still be like, oh yeah, that was worth it, right? It seems like it'd be totally. It seems like they're invincible in a lot of ways, and they're really the only people who could have done something like this. Half-Life Alyx is really cool. VR is an interesting place and an interesting landscape to be in, because I'm not necessarily sure that the ultimate goal of VR is video games, but we're reaching a point right now that's, I think, the beginning of kind of a renaissance for these kinds of things, because even smaller titles, like on the PC, there's this title Boneworks that is also just really, really impressive. It's very janky, but it's remarkable. It's exactly that, and Half-Life Alyx are the games that I envisioned when I first thought of the concept of VR, and to see them kind of happening actually, and the thought of it getting potentially better over time, and potentially these things moving over to PSVR in the future when that hardware is a little bit more stable and a little bit more powerful. That's a really exciting premise, and something that matters a great deal, I think.
Yeah, very well said. And I think what's the most, kind of more germane to this show, because we do a PlayStation themed show, of course, what I think's kind of most interesting here is, will this game leave and come to PSVR and other headsets as well? And I think you guys kind of made the point eloquently enough that they don't really need to make money, but it is kind of on this game, I should say, and it is helping push their hardware and, of course, their marketplace. But it's almost a shame that something like this is locked away there, when it could probably pretty easily be played on at least a couple of other headsets, even if they had to modify it. So that's kind of an interesting proposal on if we'll ever see this game on PlayStation or not.
I think it could be possible for whatever the next PlayStation VR. I think it would just probably be too held back by the current version of the
Yeah.
hardware. So who knows though?
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, that's a good opening salvo from our guest, Dustin. Chris, I kick it over to you for your first moment. Any moment you'd like from your list.
Yeah, so the first thing that I thought of after Half-Life, so I guess the second thing, was just this unlikely alliance between, Doom Eternal and Animal Crossing at the beginning of this year, or I guess at the beginning of this pandemic, which is like kind of like appropriately timed. It was like the only games that were out for a while that everybody was playing, and just to see how those communities embrace each other in such a weirdly appropriate way was just really kind of cool to see. I think everybody kind of needed it, especially at that time when things were looking like not necessarily as bad as they would look in the months to come, but certainly like a little unnerving and a little weird. Like it was the first of these lockdowns, and not many of us had ever experienced anything like that. Now it's like almost like, oh yeah, another lockdown. It almost sounds like
Right.
we're almost jaded to the premise that like, oh yeah, we have to stay indoors or else we'll kill people by accident. But I think at that time it was just like, it was really cool to see like two communities that like have no reason to interact with each other, just kind of embrace each other and just sort of have this whole like really wholesome environment kind of created in the midst of it. It was really something special, I think. It was kind of cool to see.
Yeah, it's funny you wrote in about this. Walter Boley wrote, or you had this on your list rather, because Walter Boley wrote into us about this and said, "Hey CNC and D, I'd like to shine a light on one of the most bizarre and wholesome moments of 2020, the alliance between the fans of Doom Eternal and Animal Crossing New Horizons. I don't know how it started, but one day the internet was full of fan art featuring Doomslayer and Isabelle being best friends. It was wonderful. From posters to music video mashups and full-on original animated shorts, it never failed to make me smile. If you haven't seen it yourselves, just type in Doom Eternal Animal Crossing on YouTube and enjoy. Thanks, dudes, and here's to another great year." Yeah, I like this as well, and it is a little bit of a memorable symbol of these weird days when we'll look back and maybe remember that, because to me, I think about certain games are tied to this, into this pandemic, and some of them make sense and some of them really don't. Like, I tie a game like Miles Morales to the pandemic because it came out during it, but I also tie some games that I played randomly before the pandemic even began that I played during the pandemic and hence kind of tied towards it. So Animal Crossing is one of those games. Animal Crossing is this meteoric, huge success. And as I think I said a few shows ago, guys, Animal Crossing has sold better on Switch than any PlayStation exclusive has ever sold on any of the platforms, any of the 6 core, or 7 if you want to count PSVR, about 8 now, PS5, core PlayStation platforms. So a really remarkable success story. And of course, Doom Eternal, it did its thing as well this year. Although I think, Chris, you're a little disappointed in maybe a little bit of a lack of attention, right?
I think that's just kind of always the risk with games that come out like that early. But I don't necessarily, like, I understand. Like, it's been a really hectic year. It's been, like, very bizarre. It wasn't, like, a meteoric success in the same way that Animal Crossing was, because it just, quite frankly, didn't have that. That just wasn't in the cards. I think Animal Crossing is just so accessible and so kid-friendly that there's no way that a parent's going to go like, oh, yeah, Doom Eternal, that looks great for my, like, 5-year-old,
Sure.
So, like, I wasn't expecting, like, a crazy amount of attention necessarily to be brought to it. I do think it's a really great game, and I think the AI is on point, and it's like one of the strongest shooters from a gameplay perspective that I've ever played. But I do have some minor gripes with it. Like, I don't think it flows as well as 2016. I think there's a little bit too high of an emphasis on story, as much as I kind of enjoyed how weird that story was. I didn't fully understand it, so it is weaker in some ways than 2016, even though I think it is better in the areas that really count. But I don't know. I'm not really disappointed. I think it did well and people enjoyed it and it reviewed well. So that's that's all you can really hope for with these things.
Yeah, I think so too. And I got to get back to it. I actually never beat it. It's the same thing that happened in Doom 2016 where I actually think I got way deeper in this game the first time through and it was just like, oh, and then something else distracted me. Although that also was happening when I felt like I was dying for some reason.
It's a hard game, man. It's not easy.
No, not at all. I think I said when we were talking about it back in the day, Chris, that I had to drop it to normal difficulty. I think I said that from hard, where I usually want to play because it's just too hard. Yeah, I don't know. I was reflecting on that to Micah yesterday, where I was like, I'm just not very good at games anymore. I've kind of just come to accept that because we were talking about Sekiro, I think, or Demon Souls or something, and I was like, I just don't know that I have it in me anymore. At least the patience, but. Good selection, Chris. I will give my first selection. I feel I put it here in our document as The Last of Us Part 2's attempted assassination. I know that this game is divisive for a lot of people. I personally think it probably, I still have to really sit down and think, but I think it probably is my game of the year. I really enjoyed the game. I really like what they're doing with The Last of Us. I do think it was too long, but in playing it twice, and we talk about this in our 2-part spoiler cast and elsewhere, I don't want to be too repetitive, but game just really stuck with me emotionally. But the thing that I really can't get away from is just how I think this game was treated and what happened to it beforehand, which is so unusual. And I think because this year has been so strange for all of us and so serious and dire that we kind of have forgotten some of the weirdness that happened just a few months ago. And interestingly, a few people wrote in about this, but Trent Sinning wrote in about this and says, how's it going, guys? I think one of the biggest gaming moments of the year has to be when the entire plot of The Last of Us 2 got leaked. The original Last of Us was one of the most critically acclaimed games of all time, so obviously there was going to be massive hype around the sequel. This was one of the biggest games to release this year, and I personally believe that the leaks killed a lot of people's excitement and caused a lot of toxic feelings towards the game that otherwise would have been positive for lots of people. This was a huge moment for such a huge game, and I think it's obvious that these leaks impacted the game in a super negative way. The Last of Us Part 2 has become a curse word on Twitter and Reddit comment sections, and I would never really want to know what the reception... and I would really want to know what the reception around this game would have been if the leaks never happened. Thanks and keep up the great work. I want to know that too, especially because one of the biggest leaks, and I think I can say this, I don't think it's a spoiler because Neil Druckmann literally tweeted about this himself, was the entire idea that the character Abby was transgender. Well, whether Abby was transgender or not really didn't matter, but she wasn't transgender.
Yeah.
So I agree. I think that it's amazing. It's one of the best-selling games of the year on any platform. It's a huge success for PlayStation 4. It won all of these game awards. It's obviously going to win a bunch of game... the game awards are voted on primarily by media, so you kind of already know now what's going to win Game of the Year at places like IGN and GameSpot, I think, and I think that's totally fine. But we can't forget about this, what happened to this game, how unusual and unfortunate it was, how it created this really terrible ecosystem in which to discuss the game, not only before it came out, but after it came out. And I do think it ruined a lot of the momentum the game had. And I don't really understand still to this day why people have such a grudge against this game, especially because I think it is what it is. And,
yeah.
And I think it shows what it is. But yeah, Chris, talk to me a little bit about this has to be one of the big moments, right, of the year.
No, yeah, definitely. Like, I think, I totally forgot that it was leaked, because we're so far removed from like the launch and even just the reception, and so much has happened since then. We have a new machine, Ghosts came out, and like all this other shit happened in the meantime. I totally forgot that it was leaked. I do think the reception would have been different, although it's weird because like it's hard to know that. I don't necessarily consider myself somebody that's really swayed by things like that. In fact, I remember like when the leaks came out, and I was like, oh yeah, it's. I remember defending it quite a bit. I mean, like, hey, listen, like this. I guess this sounds like really shitty on paper. I guess, but like, I mean, it really. I feel like you need the context of having played the game to really kind of understand the gravity of all of these like little bullet points. And I remember tweeting about that a lot, and people were like, "Oh, you're just defending it." It's like, no, I'm just, I'm just trying to give it a shot because I don't think it's, I think it sucks. I think it's unfair that they kind of had the wind stolen out of their sails by that leak, because I mean that game is so heavily story based. It's like it's almost the main reason why you play a game like that. So definitely, I definitely think it changed people's minds in a negative way, and probably had people kind of going in with a sense of confirmation bias with that negative lens. But I think the thing that sucks most about it is that like I also like I don't like it, and I have like reasons, but I feel like I can't even really. I feel like it's so hard to actually talk about like the legitimate reasons why I don't like it without like stoking the flames of this like really toxic brigade. So I think it even does like a disservice to people who like genuinely have criticisms.
Well, I felt for you for that, because people do get up your ass, even in our community. Our community is pretty nice, but it just seems to be one of those games that I don't know. I think I said this, that I don't feel like it's that fun to talk about it, because it is, you can't just say anything, and people have such a hard time for some reason accepting other people's opinions on things. I just don't understand that at all. But Dustin, what do you think about this? This was a big moment, don't you think?
I feel like there's a lot of elements that created the whole fiasco around this game, and I think you guys pretty much touched on it perfectly. The only thing I want to add is that I guess it's just something that's frustrating to me is that, if you're a game developer or creator, to an extent, you want the fans to take what you created and make it their own in a way. You want it to speak to them on a personal level. And I just, when I see some of the reaction to The Last of Us 2, it just makes me feel like that some people take that too far, right? That it's no longer Naughty Dog's decision about where the story is. If you don't like it, then, you're angry and mad about it. It's the same thing with Star Wars in a way. Like, I have been very unhappy with a lot of the things that Disney does, but it's like, at the end of the day, the original trilogy is still there and I can still enjoy those. And honestly, it's not up to me, right? It can be disappointing, but when people take it to the extent where it's like they need to evangelize the word of, I guess, the negative talk around this game, that's when it just gets weird to me, that level of ownership. And I feel like people need to take a moment and step back and be like, okay, it's a game. We can have conversations about it, but it's not really ours at the end of the day.
Because there are definitely people who just don't like the game who haven't played it, Right. And it's like, I can respect somebody who doesn't like it who's played it at the very least, because that's at the very least an informed opinion, having given it a proper chance. And maybe mentally they weren't giving it a chance or whatever, but still at the very least they're informed.
Sure.
But a lot of people just I hate it, and I remember being like, why? And then they would be like, oh, something happens, right? They're almost like they were guessing. And I was like, what do you mean? I remember I was streaming not too long ago about the Game Awards, and I was kind of joking about how oh yeah, it's the Last of Us 2 awards presented by Last of Us 2, and because it's just swept that award show, and it was just kind of funny to see. And people were like, and I was talking about how look, man, I didn't like it, but it is technically impressive. The shit that they managed to get running on a PS4 in the quality that they got running, and there's a lot of things about The Last of Us 2 that are impressive, despite the fact that I didn't care for the story. And people were like, nah, it's not technically impressive. And it's like, dude, you're just lying. There's no reason to lie. Something can be technically impressive and also just not something that you like. That's very possible.
Well, I think The Last of Us Part 2 is going to have a lingering positive and negative effect in our PlayStation ecosystem. But to the point, I think that I just feel bad for Naughty Dog, and I feel bad for the many players that weren't able to go in blind, including me. And that was a really disappointing situation for me. It reminded me, first of all, of how mean and cruel people can be to others that are looking forward to something. And also just how I think it also showed us, right, guys, how, I don't know, how hard it is to avoid stuff. I think a lot of people just got the game spoiled for them without looking. Not everyone's I always make fun of my brother on Knockback because he seeks spoilers out. He loves spoiling shit for himself. I don't know why.
That bothers me.
Yeah, because you edit
so
the show.
Weird.
But he always spoils stuff for himself. We were doing the Shadow of the Colossus Knockback episode, and he was saying how he told his son, something happens in the game, and he told his son, he's like, oh, don't worry about it. It's not like it seems. And I was like, how do you even know that if you just playing the game for the first time? And lo and behold, it's because he spoils it for himself every time. But I feel like with Final Fantasy, or I'm sorry, not Final Fantasy, with The Last of Us Part 2, that it really is unfortunate how many people were exposed to stuff that they didn't want to know. And I think also how many people were exposed to stuff that wasn't true. I think that's another thing that we can't forget about. Some of the spoilers were not true or were reinterpreted or misinterpreted as something else. And I said that was going to be the case before the game came out. And to the Abby situation, it was exactly right. That was probably the biggest piece of information other than a couple of other important story points. And it was wrong. And how many people did that turn off to the game? Not that you should be turned off to a game because a transgender person's in it, but I think you understand what I'm saying. Let's go back to our guest,
Sure.
Dustin. Select any of the remaining 4 that you have on your list.
Number 4 for me was finally playing Cyberpunk 2077, and really the whole situation around it, which is happening right now. So it's been really interesting to see this play out, because it's really, for me at least, two sides of the same coin. On one side, I'm playing the game on PC. I'm having a really great time. There are bugs. There are a lot of issues, but I'm having a really overall great experience playing it. And on the flip side, which you guys will, I'm sure, go over all of this in Sacred on Thursday. So hopefully I'm not repeating in advance what you guys are going to say, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure.
But the other side of it is just the whole fiasco with the base versions of the old consoles. And it's really got me thinking about how the industry refuses to learn from its previous mistakes. Because I was thinking, like, this has happened, I would say, prominently 2 other times this generation. First of all, with Assassin's Creed Unity, where we specifically knew that the embargo wasn't till after the release. And so that kind of raised some red flags. And it turned out that they did that intentionally because they knew the game was not running well. And then a few years later, it happened again with No Man's Sky. And just like that, the writing was on the wall that there were problems, yet it didn't really seem to matter because the hype was so high behind it. And now with Cyberpunk, it seems to be the exact same scenario where we, and I say we as an industry, should have seen the writing on the wall with the way the review situation went out, in that it was to a very select amount of reviewers. It was only on PC. They had never shown the PS4 version, things like that. And so my hope would be is that with these types of instances happening, that as an industry, we can learn and say, no, if this happens again, it doesn't matter if it's one of the most anticipated games of, literally the decade. We're not going to let this happen again, as far as like how we do coverage on those games, because in the end, a lot of people got burned. And honestly, CD Projekt Red played the industry and let it happen. And so for me, it's definitely one of the defining moments of the year. And I think something that we're going to be talking about for years to come. So this is just one that we'll have to see. I'm really curious now with this refund situation, how this is really going to shake out.
Yeah, Chris, you're playing it as well, aren't you? Are you playing on Xbox Series X?
Yeah, I'm playing it on the Series X.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's this whole situation is so weird because it's not the first time this has happened. Obviously, like Dustin said, the whole review situation, this has happened a myriad of times in the past. But this is the first time that I can recall really ever where a game comes out and there are essentially 3 completely different versions of it. There's the high-end benchmark PC title that like has some like Fallout New Vegas tier kind of bugs where it's like, it's not super smooth, but it's an incredible marvel of an experience and it looks gorgeous and it's industry defining and it's probably going to be the new like, hey, I think Cyberpunk 2077 is going to be the new it's going to be the new Crysis. It's going to be like, hey, can your PC run Cyberpunk 2077 at 60 frames and at 1440 or 4K or whatever with ray tracing, and I've seen this footage and it is impressive, and in a lot of ways it is the game that they've been showing. But then you have like the Series X and the PS5, which right now are just running the PS4 and Xbox One versions with like taking advantage of some of the hardware that the new consoles provide, and that's a pretty decent experience. Like I'm enjoying my time on Series X with it, even if it's not like as visually spectacular as I know the PC version is, and it's got like a little bit more, I would say, substantive bugs. Like on Series X, I've run into like I think 3 separate occasions where the game just freezes for like 7 seconds and then just goes back to normal, and it's like, all right, well that was an inconvenience, I guess, but like I'm still enjoying the game and it's still really cool and I'm loving this, and it would be better on PC, but like whatever, it's still pretty damn good. And then you have the base PS4 and Xbox One versions, which are just unacceptable. Like it looks like Witcher 3 on Switch.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Like it just looks like a watercolor painting, and it's really, I don't even know how you review this game because it's depending on what platform you're playing, you're getting a completely different experience. And this is the first time that I can really recall this happening, and I think for that reason alone, it's definitely going to stand out.
Makes me wonder, and again, we will have already covered this on the previous episode, which we've not yet recorded, so I won't be too verbose here with my thoughts, but I think that the interesting thing here is, well, it's twofold. Number one, I think CD Projekt has squandered incredible goodwill that they've gathered over the last 5.5 years since Witcher 3 came out and kind of gave it away for nothing. And I think that was a strategic error on their part because they had, I don't want to say that they had their fellow RPG makers on the ropes. That's not it at all. It's just that everyone kind of looked at them as a premier role-playing game studio, the way that Bethesda Game Studios was 10 years ago, and they already screwed it up. It only took them one game to screw it up, and it doesn't matter how much they fix Cyberpunk. This is going to stick with them for a really long time, and if not forever, in theory. And I'm kind of proud of myself in some, Colin was right way, because when the game went gold and then they said that they were delaying it, I said, I'm like, this doesn't happen. This doesn't even make any sense.
Oh yeah,
and something is wrong. Something is wrong with the game. Going gold it has a definition, and when you delay a game that's gone gold, what that basically means is that you're still printing the game as it is, and then you're going to fix it later. And so that's what I said, right, Chris? Which was people are going to have this game on disc the way it was 2 months ago.
No, yeah.
So not only, it's screwed up.
We talked at length about that. We were like, I mean, even when they first started showing Cyberpunk, I think well-informed, the well-informed media people and content creators and influencers, anybody who knows anything about hardware and video games and considers themselves like a deeply informed enthusiast, they could see the footage of Cyberpunk 2077 and know full well that was a next generation title, and that it was not going to, it's very clearly the premiere experience was not going to be on PS4 and Xbox One. And I knew that the first second I saw that the first shot of the crowd with all those different people, and I was like, all right, well, this is clearly not going to be running on PS4. And as obvious as that might be to people like you and me who really pay attention to this stuff, as obvious as it was to us that Anthem wasn't going to be great or that No Man's Sky was going to be a bunch of missed promises, the average person isn't necessarily that informed, and maybe the average person does think oh yeah, my machine runs The Last of Us 2. Why wouldn't it run a game like that? That's probably what they're thinking. And I've seen a lot of defense for CD Projekt Red in the sense that hey, come on, you really expected this game to run on Xbox One? Well, it's not their fault because they marketed this game as a PS4 title.
Yeah, they sold it anyway.
Yeah, obviously, I don't think any of us were really buying that this game was going to run well. But, we're the minority here. There are millions of people who probably saw Cyberpunk 2077 running in that trailer and being like, oh yeah, I can't wait to get that experience on my PS4. And it's not their fault that they're not, in tune with, what random access memory means, or what GPU can handle what. That's not their fault. The fault is on CD Projekt for not being more transparent. And I think a bigger issue than the game coming out incomplete, because I think we've kind of come to a point in the industry where we almost kind of expect that. And we kind of root for these studios to kind of put something out and then almost fix it in the same way that No Man's Sky really turned that shit around and Rainbow Six Siege turned that shit around. I think the biggest deal of damage that's been done by this situation is just the way that they handled the review process and how they were just unwilling to show the beta versions of the game, because I genuinely think this is I sincerely believe that if CD Projekt Red was like, hey, listen, this is the PS4 version and Xbox One version, and they were just honest about it, and it still got 4 out of 10s or whatever the fuck, and and it was just a buggy mess, I still think if they were just upfront about that, I don't think it would have hurt them nearly as bad.
Yeah, it's
not even close. I really do think the hiding of that version did way more damage to them and put them in more of a classic EA kind of position than a CD Projekt Red position. And that's unfortunate because they squandered that goodwill for pretty much no good reason. And I'm sure that it's a decision that was made by a lot of higher ups, but at the end of the day, like, the studio is the studio, and this is what happened.
Yeah, I don't know what went on over there. I think we're going to find out a lot more. We've already found out quite a bit, and it's hard to say who. All we know is that the people in the trenches, it's not their fault. But here's one thing that I don't, what, forget it. I'll leave it for the regular show because I don't want to talk about things twice in a row. Mm-hmm. But there are a few important points that we'll get to, obviously, with Cyberpunk, or will have already gotten to by the time you hear this episode. But Joshua Anderson wrote into us on Patreon, something similar. He says, "Sup, fellas, straight away to me, the worst moment for me was the suborbital and unattainable hype of Cyberpunk 2077, along with its delays that only made matters worse. I grew 100% tired of hearing about it, and now I'm 100% tired of the inevitable backlash." I agree with you there. I never was that hyped for this game at all. I don't think I had actually any. I don't get hyped for really any game, so
yeah,
until I play it. And by the way, I feel like this kind of forgives for some people that are mad that we don't do more preview coverage or aren't more aggressive in getting in touch with publishers and developers. This is kind of why we have no so-called blood on our hands. We weren't telling you to get excited about this game or filling you full of shit based on what PR and marketing was telling us. So this is one of those examples where I think the way we do things is right. And I agree with you. I'm so fucking tired of hearing about this game, which is why in some way the afterglow of this terrible situation with the game not running properly is it's just going to keep it here even longer, and
yeah,
we're never going to stop talking about it. So yeah, that's fun.
It's such a shame too, because I genuinely love it.
It looks great.
Yeah,
it looks great.
It sucks,
but nonetheless, Chris, it's your turn.
All right, let me scroll up on this little list here. One of the other ones that I had thought stuck out to me quite a lot was Ghost of Tsushima's just surprisingly masterful open world design. I'm not somebody who really cares much for open world games. In fact, I grow increasingly tired and weary of them as the months and years progress. I've found myself gravitating towards linear experiences, even just shorter, like level-based experiences, like Ghost Runner super recently was something that I really enjoyed, and like it's very small scale, very linear, very like, okay, this is well designed and this is like a ride that I'm being taken on, and I love it. And I remember seeing Ghost of Tsushima for the first time and thinking, like, yeah, that looks, it's an action samurai game. It's cool, whatever. I'm sure that's probably going to be okay. And then after The Last of Us Part 2 came out, and I was a little disappointed, and I was like, oh, man, well, I guess this is the next thing. I guess this is probably going to be a little bit more enjoyable, but it's probably going to be fine. And I just remember being genuinely swept away by a game that I just really did not expect to like as much as I ended up liking. I don't necessarily care that much for ninja stuff. I don't care that much for open world. I don't care that much for stealth. I don't really care that much for sword combat. But for some reason, man, this thing really stuck out to me. And I think a lot of the reason why is just because I think the way that they approached the open world and the way that they approached just mission markers and waypoints and making it like diegetic to the world and making a game that was just enough of a video game to feel fun and accessible and enjoyable, but also like immersive and serious enough to feel like a proper experience. And just the restraint involved in just with the fog of war and the way that they organize all these quests and in what order. And it was just such a breath of fresh air in that genre that like I think I described it this way when I finished playing it, where it's like, this is like Ghost of Tsushima was like if Assassin's Creed was fucking phenomenal. And I still feel that way, and I still think about it all the time. And I especially when PS5 came out and I found out that there was like a 60 frames per second version available, I like jumped back into it and I was like, wow, this is still just so good. And it was a genuine surprise this year. I was not anticipating Ghosts to do as well as it did, both in the market and just with me personally.
It's funny you bring up Assassin's Creed, because Will Selfridge wrote into us about this game, Ghost of Tsushima, from Sucker Punch on Patreon. He says, "Hey, CLS crew, my favorite gaming memory comes by way of feudal Japan and Ghost of Tsushima. Ghost was such a pleasant experience and was the Assassin's Creed Japan that I've always been waiting for. The game was my first platinum ever and ended up getting into my law review paper as part of the intro and conclusion. Sucker Punch really delivered, and I can't wait to see what they do with the sequel. Cheers and good riddance to 2020. Thank you for writing in, Will. And I'm with you. I think I don't like it as much as I think either of you guys do, but I do like the game a lot. I think it's great. I platinumed it too, just like Will here did. And I think the bigger surprise is how people really attached themselves to this game and how it kind of became a symbol within the first party of like, well, at least this game's good for the people that didn't like The Last of Us Part 2. I think that was kind of an interesting development there as well. Dustin, what do you make of this inclusion of Ghost of Tsushima? And by the way, Chris, very nice use of the word diegetic.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Which I believe that means it's the way the characters in something interact with the world as it's presented, right?
Yeah, it's an editing term. It's like like in a Tarantino movie, if there's like a song playing for like a montage, and then you find out that the song's coming from like a radio in like the very next scene, and it's like shut off. That would be like diegetic sound, and non-diegetic sound is like like a film score or something. Gotcha. Interesting. Yeah. So Dustin, talk to me about Ghost here.
Yeah, I like the way that Chris framed this as far as being masterful open world design, because I think that's what really stuck out to me about the game overall, is just that it's kind of the more subtle things, I guess, in that, first of all, the fact that it just doesn't like throw up a million icons on the map is probably one of the biggest things to me. And I actually just thought of that recently from starting Cyberpunk, and I look at the map and I'm like, oh yeah, this is what these games do again. Like I'd almost kind of like, I was like, oh no, back to this. But so yeah, the way that it drip feeds you things to do, and the way that it slowly lets things into the map for you to do instead of just feeling overwhelming, is really a nice way to do it. But in addition, just how they really made this game that is so violent in a lot of ways also have a lot of like zen qualities to it, where it's you'll be attacking and killing a base full of dudes, and then you'll be taking a hot bath or writing a haiku. And that's just something about this game that really stuck out to me, is this very peaceful quality amongst the violence was really neat to see.
I'm so glad that people enjoyed this game as much as they did. I know that, at least for me, I was skeptical because of Sony's strange lead-in with this game. They didn't really show much of it, as you remember, and it seemed like it was going to get screwed by The Last of Us, but I actually think that it ended up benefiting just in the unique situation that it found itself in with The Last of Us, pertaining to The Last of Us's leaks and then the kind of toxicity around the game. I think Ghost of Tsushima was actually the big winner there, but the good news is that it ended up being a great game on its own. So congratulations to Sucker Punch. I'm sure we'll be hearing more about those games, both from Naughty Dog and Sucker Punch, in the Game of the Year discussion we'll do later on. All right, boys. For me, the next one is, I just wanted to talk about PlayStation 5's unusual lead-in. That's at least what I call it here. And Neo JD actually wrote in on Patreon, and he said that the PS5 reveal showcase was a big one for him. And he said that's when I knew PlayStation came to play for keeps again. The showcase was fine, but I think what I'll remember about 2020 in terms of PlayStation, other than the great games that came to PS4 late in its life, is just this very unusual cadence to the way things had to go during COVID. PlayStation 5 was talked about in really weird and mysterious ways. We didn't see very much of it. We saw it in really scattered ways, kind of sent to different publications like Wired and I think Bloomberg had some scoops, and Wall Street Journal, obviously. And so we had to kind of put this interesting picture together. I thought it was kind of fun, as someone who covers games for a living and has covered PlayStation for a living and games for a living for so long. It felt like a little bit of a scavenger hunt, and it was annoying running a show like this. But I actually think, as a fan, it was fun because we didn't really know exactly what we were going to get in the same way that we knew in previous generations. It was incredibly strange and incredibly unusual to have to deal with something like that because of the global situation we found ourselves in, and kind of not really knowing whether this thing was going to come out or not. I remember really feeling that way. It wasn't just about having something to talk about on our show and giving getting people commenting or whatever. It was really like, I'm not super convinced this thing's coming out. And by the way, I still kind of stand by the fact that I don't know that they should have released the thing this year. I don't know that there's that much to play on it right now. And I think that the sheer frustration of people trying to find one is really not, it's reflecting nicely on Sony because they have the hot product this Christmas, but it sucks for a lot of people. And I don't know that demand has much to do with it. I don't think that PlayStation 5's demand is through the roof. I think that Sony can't manufacture enough to satiate even normal demand. And so I think it's just weird situation. I'll never forget the PlayStation 5 coming out like this because it is so very different from previous generations. What do you think about that, Dustin?
Early on, I feel like Xbox had so much momentum looking back at since they revealed the console at the Game Awards. And you can see how their two separate strategies now played out now that we can see them both finally released. And I think there are arguments for both sides. I feel like Xbox blew their load a little too early in the fact that when it got closer to launch, we had kind of seen everything laid out already. And I think PlayStation's strategy of kind of doing a little bit more of a drip feed, while it was confusing when we were getting so much Xbox news, the fact that it was closer to launch may have been more effective as far as building excitement for the console. But I'm sure that there's other viewpoints that you could say that the other way was better, but that's just how I see it.
Yeah, I don't really know. I think like Dustin, there are probably good arguments to both. I do think having no information, then having like a sudden kind of blowout of information like towards the launch was a little bit more did a little bit more for the hype machine, I think, and it got people a little bit more excited and a little bit more invested in talking about it. But I don't know if either one was particularly ideal, really. Like I do think Microsoft went too early, and I do think Sony waited too long. I think, and in large part, I think obviously Sony waited a long time because I don't even think it was necessarily intentional. I think a lot of their hand was just sort of forced by the fact that they really genuinely probably couldn't even talk much about a lot of stuff because I still firmly believe that they weren't necessarily sure that they were going to put this thing out. I didn't appreciate it. I know as somebody who's just like wants to just know shit and who isn't really interested in, getting myself excited with like little scavenger hunt type deals. Like I don't really care about that. I just want to know shit. And like even just before the launch, there were like a bunch of things that we still didn't know about the UI and like how things were going to work. And perhaps if we had known earlier, maybe some of the weirder issues wouldn't be as annoying because they could have had some time to like respond to feedback at the very least. Because I still feel like the UI on PS5 needs a lot of fixing.
I agree. The trophies especially are annoying the shit out of me, although I know that that's a use case, but...
No, yeah, I've seen the trophy list. I don't necessarily... There's some aspects that are definitely improved, but like I feel like if they had just showed us earlier, that feedback could have been addressed and you would have had like a stronger machine. And I think that's honestly the case with the Series X, where it's like I think kind of like from a feature set standpoint, I feel like it's a little bit stronger of a machine, and I think that's in large part due to the fact that they've just had this insider program where they're just allowed to just sort of give previews of these builds to the people who like want to see them, and I think that results in like a stronger product, whether or not that matters, and whether or not it matters more than like the games that are available or like the excitement that's built up is like another contention entirely, but. I would have definitely preferred to hear more about the PS5 earlier than we did.
It's just interesting that this unholy alliance that kind of existed this year, it kind of conspiring against Sony, just not only with COVID and manufacturing issues, but also just and I think they talked about this a little bit, or they might not have, but it was leaked in one of the Wall Street Journal articles or whatever about how they're just really competing for the same components on a global market that a lot of others need now. Everyone's kind of crossing over, so it's just harder to manufacture these things. And yeah, I'd be interested to just have I don't want to do this year again, let's not say that, but just to have a hypothetical academic redo to see how this would have gone in a normal year. What would have happened, how things would have rolled out. Would there be even more games available? Because as Chris and I have discussed in the past, in the recent past, I feel like PlayStation is going to have a little bit of a hard time in the first half of next year, not in selling units and in selling third-party games, but there's really nothing to carry it except for Returnal until we see more of Horizon and maybe things that we've not heard of yet, God of War, if it makes it. So a lot of really interesting stuff to consider with PlayStation 5 moving forward, but at least it's out. And we have ours, although I'm very sorry that there are many of you out there that do not. All right. Let's circle back, Dustin. Each of us have 3 left. So, Dustin, select one of yours and let's continue the conversation.
Sure. Let's go with Microsoft upping the competition. So this specifically, I'm referring to the purchase of Bethesda just being in really a bombshell for the industry, being that Bethesda, owner of numerous beloved IPs, whether it's Skyrim and the Elder Scrolls or Fallout or now Doom and Dishonored, now being under Microsoft's wing. And it's going to be weird to see it play out because it seems like every few weeks we have indication on whether or not they are or aren't coming outside of like the Microsoft umbrella, whether it's Xbox or PC or whether they're going to be on PlayStation. And so I want to be hopeful that Microsoft takes good care of Bethesda. I think that they do a pretty good job with their other studios. I think this is a bit of a different situation since they are kind of indicating that Bethesda will be still operating as like an umbrella within an umbrella with their own publishing. So like how there was 2 different strategies with the rollout of the consoles, we're seeing a very different strategy from Sony where they're kind of taking their time and incubating these studios instead of purchasing. So it'll be cool to see a much more competitive Microsoft when it comes to first-party software in the future.
I feel like this is a pretty big thing as well this year, although because the deal is not solidified this year, I suppose it'll also carry over into next year. And then, like you said, when we get actual answers from Microsoft about what they intend on doing with Bethesda and other acquisitions, or ZeniMax generally, then we'll have a better idea. Adam Thum wrote into us and said, "Hail Caesar, Colin, and Augustus, Chris, and Dustin. Depending on who you are, I still think the biggest moment in the gaming in the year is Microsoft's acquisition of ZeniMax. Is it good or bad is yet to be determined, but I think it overall shows just how committed a Sony rival is to trying to up their game for what is now the current gen. While Sony won't lose out on all content and even will have some timed exclusives first after this deal, it's really clear that the content will be at a premium for us gamers, and I think this will be the greatest gen for games overall. Love the show and respect all you guys have done to provide me with some entertainment in this really interesting year." You're very welcome. Thank you for your kind words, Adam. So I think, and I want to throw it over to Chris about this, but personally, I'm frustrated by the way Microsoft talks about it because I feel like they want to have it both ways. And I think it's completely transparent and quite obnoxious where they are willing to kind of flaunt that they made this extremely important, very expensive purchase, $7.5 billion, twice as much as Disney paid, more than twice as much as Disney paid for Star Wars, which is almost hard to believe. And I will say that I think Microsoft substantially overpaid. And I think the only reason that they did that was because that was the only way that this was for sale to begin with, was to vastly overpay to get it. And so they did. I feel like it could be huge, but I feel like Microsoft might not necessarily have the management chops to make this work, at least in the short term. Micah and I were discussing this a night or two ago, and I was saying to her that very similar to what I said in the beginning when this deal first happened. Now that Microsoft owns about 25 studios, which is incredible, once they purge themselves of all of the things that they owe others contractually, so once they can get like Ghostwire Tokyo out and Deathloop, so that frees up a couple of their studios that were being the Bethesda deal, and everyone's kind of just working on Microsoft projects, then I think that things will become interesting in terms of where these things end up, because I'm still a firm believer that Starfield, for instance, will be on PlayStation 5. So there's no doubt that this is a big deal, but we still have a lot of questions. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think it's a little too early to tell like what exactly this deal entails because Microsoft hasn't really been all that clear. In fairness, though, I don't even know if it necessarily needs to be. I don't know if they necessarily need to be that clear because we're a while away from this deal even being finalized, and even when it is finalized, it's going to be a while before every studio that Bethesda owns is working on something that is, a Microsoft product, like you said. But I also just don't think that like they couldn't make this deal under the table. Like this information was going to get out, so it's kind of like, all right, well, this is going to be news, but it's something that's still being worked on, and we won't really have the the full fruition of this deal for like years. So I don't know. Like I think this is definitely like probably like the biggest thing that happened. I know that I was shocked by it. Like I remember seeing the tweet in the morning that it happened, and I was like, what? I thought it was a joke. Like I thought it was like, oh, there's no way this is real. Like there's no way that they just bought Bethesda. Like that's like Sony buying like EA. You know, like that's insane. Like that's like such a weird premise that you almost can't even wrap your mind around it. But it happened, and I was like, oh shit, this is okay.
It's interesting for two reasons too, both in hindsight. Number one is that I feel like now with CD Projekt kind of dropping the ball, this makes Bethesda a little more premium again. And so I don't think that Microsoft got them at an appropriate price, but I think that they're worth a little more now because CD Projekt, who is their major rival in at least the RPG space, has kind of dropped the ball with Cyberpunk. I think that that's super relevant to consider. But the other thing that's really fascinating, and we will have already talked about this on the previous episode, but we discussed some weeks ago, Chris, I think you'll remember, that 2K came in and tried to purchase or was purchasing Codemasters. And that was announced, and they announced that. And then 2 days ago, it came out that, well, no, actually, they're not. EA is buying Codemasters. They offered them $400 million more than 2K. And so in the middle of the deal was reversed. And I feel like, is that possible? I don't know.
No.
But I don't think it's possible only because the price is so premium already that no one's going to come in and pay them more.
That's really the main thing. It's like Microsoft really came in there with like big swinging dick money, you know, like that's an insane. The fact that they can just pay that and just continue running like business as usual is probably one of the biggest flexes I've ever seen.
Sure.
Just like, oh yeah, here's billions of dollars. Also, yeah, we'll get this sorted some other time, like whatever. It's like, what? Jesus Christ.
Especially because a lot of these deals are sometimes in stock, but I think that I'm pretty sure the ZeniMax deal's in cash, which is even crazier. So,
dude, I sweat when I spend like $20 on like food, you know?
Yeah, you don't know if you're going to regret it or not, but
yeah,
nonetheless. All right, so Chris, let's stay with you. You have 3 options left to choose from your list, so hit us with the next one.
Yeah, so these are smaller, but I think worth mentioning. I think just to get this one out of the way while we're talking a little bit about the business side of things, just the whole kerfuffle around these pre-orders. I don't think this was a best moment, but it's one that like stuck out to me.
Yeah, it's definitely a moment.
Just like, wow, this is the most stressful time that I've ever had at the launch of a console, trying to secure one of these goddamn things and just refreshing pages and being like, oh, hey, Walmart, it's in your cart. Oh, just kidding. And just like websites crashing and then things going live earlier than they were supposed to, and just retailers not handling things super well and overpromising and overselling and understocking. And this is probably the first time that I can remember where this has happened to both platforms on launch. You know, like usually, you know, the Wii, obviously we have stories about the Wii that was like famously like kind of like understocked, obviously intentionally. Nintendo has not been so shy about admitting or showing that that's what they do. I mean, my God, the fact that I still can't believe that they're just selling those 3D Mario games until next year and that's it.
Yeah, it's
just crazy.
They do their thing.
Just really insane, like really weird, like psychologically questionable tactics on Nintendo's part. But, you know, this is the first time where it's like, and to their credit and to, you know, to the benefit of their doubt, it's like it's not necessarily all their fault. Obviously, there's a global pandemic. It's affected supply lines. It affects, you know, shipping and even just the way that we interact with each other. So, like, of all years to happen, this would be the year to happen. But it definitely stuck out to me and everybody that I, you know, was talking to who was just like stressing out, just trying to get these things.
It's become almost a tradition on Twitter, at least, to just watch these things trend every day. Like you'll see Best Buy trending or whatever. And and it's heartbreak over and over again. And guys, I got to say again, and I think I was a little flippant with this earlier on when we got our pre-orders and stuff, but I really can't believe like I got 3 pre-orders. Like, it's not like I did any, like I hacked a website or something like that. Like I just was, I guess, ready to go. And then I got a 4th one from a friend that didn't want his anymore. So, and I gave 2 of them away. So I have 2 for myself, but it's so unusual. Like I wonder the dice roll of life, right? If I did that 20 times, how many times would I have scored 3 pre-orders, right? Like one from each of the big retailers. So I think in hindsight, I was just very lucky because people are, excuse me, just really struggling out there. And I think a lot of people have just given up. And I'll say right now, maybe it's a little bit hypocritical based on what I said a few episodes ago, Chris, but I would have paid, if I was in that situation, I would have paid for a black market one by now. So, I would have, just because I think it's salient to say, listen, my time has some value. This is annoying as fuck. I'll just pay $1,000, but I have I need to do that for my job. And I also have the ability financially to do that, which a lot of people don't. And I understand that. So I think that that's a great choice for a moment of the year. Dustin, how is everything looking from the pre-order situation and just getting the consoles from your perspective?
Right. Yeah, it's been weird because I have a few people I know that have been wanting one. And so I've been trying again to try to get some, just since I'm always sitting in front of my computer doing whatever. And so it's been weird because it's been much, much harder to get more of them. Colin, I was in the same boat as you in that I had multiple pre-orders. I think we talked about that on the show. And all of those pre-orders went to people I know. They were paid for without any kind of extra on top. They were just a straight deal. So yeah, it's weird seeing how difficult they are now. And it's frustrating too, because a lot of these online storefronts are just not equipped to deal with this type of demand for a specific item. Like, I specifically was trying to get one from Walmart because they were coming in and out, and it was just no chance. I was there exactly at the time that it said that they were going to be in stock, and it just didn't even show up for me as in stock. So hopefully, in the next few months. But honestly, I'm concerned that this is going to be the story of most of 2021 as well.
Yeah. And you also have to consider just like the fact that like it's not just
pre-orders and supply lines that are hard. Even just getting the damn thing delivered reliably.
Yeah.
I had to go across the street because they delivered my thing to the wrong building, and I was like, oh my god, I have to steal my own PlayStation out of a different building. And then my Series X was I think 2 weeks late, which is a godsend compared to a lot of people who are still waiting. But yeah, it never seems to end. Once there's one hurdle that's overcome, there's always one other one, or two other ones that you got to deal with, and it's crazy.
Chris, there was some comments on that episode where you talked about that story that people were theorizing that your delivery driver was intending on stealing that afterwards. That's an intentional known trick where they'll deliver it to a wrong place, and then after their shift, go swipe it. Because you said yours was partially opened, right?
Yeah, the tape was fucked with. Yeah.
So, I think that you obviously were one step ahead of him. If that was the case, that was, you did a good job there.
Yeah, no, that was some pretty good sleuthing I did.
It's interesting. Yeah, first of all, very well done. I remember that was stressful for all of us watching that day. But yeah, it's you're right. I think this is going to be a very similar situation to Wii in 2007, and the only thing Sony can hope is that, very similar to the Wii, that the frustration doesn't overwhelm the excitement, because at some point you reach that inflection point. I actually reached that point with Wii when I was in college. I was a senior in college when it came out, and I stopped looking the rest of that spring of 2007 because I'm like, fuck it. I'm not going to find one. This is fucking obnoxious. I remember going into GameStop to find one, not really knowing what I was walking into, the guy basically laughing at me, and me walking out with a copy of Final Fantasy VI on Game Boy Advance because I needed something to play that December. And that memory just sticks out to me so much. So I hope that everything ramps up. And there's some rumor that PS4 Pro has been discontinued. I don't know if you guys saw this. I don't know if that's true or not, but if that's true, then it makes it extra urgent that they fix this problem, because it's a little premature to start pulling the other units off when you can, first of all, drop the price precipitously and probably sell a bunch of those. But nonetheless, very good choice for your third selection. I have a couple here, a few left. So I'm going to go with this one. Final Fantasy VII Remake actually comes out. And A. Money Wilson wrote in and said, hey, CNC, I definitely feel the best moment came in April of this year with the release of Final Fantasy VII Remake. The looks and gameplay were amazing, totally giving us the rehash memories from an epic story, abridged, and came with quality art. As fans of the Final Fantasy VII game that was so endearing and talked about for decades, like the theme of the game, this remake definitely provided great hope in our dark year. I gotta say, first of all, it's here. I mean, it did arrive. It's unbelievable. It's literally, I mean that in the literal old form, unbelievable that Final Fantasy VII Remake came out. And not only that it came out, but that it ended up being awesome. And not only that it ended up being awesome, but that it ended up being one of the very best selling games of the year on one platform. So you can only imagine how well it's going to do when it migrates to Xbox and elsewhere. I'm only on chapter, well, I'm not only because there's 18 chapters, but I'm on chapter 14, which is basically the last chapter in the game where you can do side quests and stuff like that. And we are still going to get our spoiler cast and review discussion in before the end of the year, which I'm really excited about. I really fell in love with this game. And the only reason that I stopped playing it that first time was because I got distracted with other stuff. I was moving and all of that. But I got to say, guys, it came and it saw and it conquered. It really did. I just couldn't believe it. And my only fear is one that I've reiterated so many times, which is that Square Enix resists the urge to rush the next version of the next copy of the game. And even if it takes 10 years to finish it, they better do it this way, because they really did prove many of us wrong. And they might have figured it out when they got rid of CyberConnect and brought it in-house and fixed it. But nonetheless, the final result is nothing short of, in my opinion, staggering. And it's one of the very best games of the year. Dustin, as a RPG nerd, I'm curious what your take is on this selection.
Yeah, it's always exciting when there's a game that's been in development for so long. This was the case for me with Kingdom Hearts 3, which unfortunately I would say overall the end result wasn't quite living up to what we had hoped. But either way, it was still exciting since it was a sequel to a game I had waited for since I was in like 4th or 5th grade. So finally getting that and seeing the end product being really good is exciting. I just am hoping, I really want some kind of PS5 patch for it, whether it be 60 FPS or something like that. I would love to see that.
I would love that too. I feel like you're going to see that. I feel like there's so many different ways that they can now re-release this, especially when the next version comes out. But I'm so hoping that they don't just say, all right, let's finish it in another part. They got to take their time. That's my big thing here. Chris, I know this game kind of caught you, and I know that you're more of a open to Final Fantasy VII than you are to many other JRPGs. Do you feel like this was a huge moment for not only the genre but for our industry this year?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think Final Fantasy VII is like a bona fide classic, and I think just to have that back in the public consciousness in any way, no matter, like, honestly, even if it was just, a faithfully recreated version of the original that kind of like used the same style, but like with better graphics and like a little bit like maybe redone cutscenes. I think even if it was that style of remake, I think it would have done really, really well. And I think it would have made just as much of an impact, just because that game is so staggeringly timeless in a lot of ways. I think the soundtrack is just so perfect. And just the visual style and like the world design of Midgar, even outside of just like really crudely pre-rendered images, is just really, really compelling. And it's the only Final Fantasy game that's really grabbed me for a multitude of reasons. And I think just the cultural significance of it kind of inherently makes it like one of the year's biggest moments. And the fact that it was done so well, I hadn't finished it because I got dragged away, distracted by a lot of things too. I think I was moving at the time as well, actually, like not too long after you. But what I played of it was really, really good.
I'm so excited that it came out and that it was good and that we can move on, because it did end up becoming a joke. It was very similar to Final Fantasy Versus 13, which ended up becoming Final Fantasy 15, and how that kind of just stuck around until it came out and people liked it. I think Final Fantasy 15, for as good as people thought it was, I don't think there's any question that Final Fantasy 7 Remake is the superior game, at least in my mind, but I would like to get back to 15 and spend more time with it. All right. Dustin, we each have 2 left now, so I kick it back over to you to select one of your remaining choices.
So the next one for me is gaming during the pandemic. And I'm going to start off by reading a write-in from Zach Forney, because I feel like it, in a way, is a very similar experience to mine. Zach says, Persona 5 Royal came out during lockdown. I know this makes me a disgusting weeb, but getting to replay this game during April made me feel like I was hanging out with old friends and family that I couldn't see because I was stuck inside, unable to go to school in person or work. It reminds me how therapeutic games can be and why Persona 5 is my favorite JRPG of all time. I know you guys don't have love for this game. Well, luckily I'm here for this episode, so you're set. But I know you get how certain games can make you feel sane in times of turmoil.
Certainly.
And so, yeah, it was really cool how the release schedule of certain games really worked out, I think, for a lot of people during the pandemic. And for me, Persona 5 Royal was one of them that just came out at such a perfect time where, because my wife wasn't working and I was doing the same type of normal things that I was doing from home, but we weren't going out. Like, we weren't seeing people. We had no other really activities that we had to go out and do. So there was so much more time that we could just do whatever we wanted. And for me, Persona 5 Royal, it was perfect because it's such a big, daunting game. And I feel like if it had come out during a different time, it may have been a different story. I'm not saying that I wouldn't have played all the way through it, but it definitely would have been harder to get through since a lot of it is the same content. And now, looking at it, and maybe it's the context in which I played it, is definitely one of my favorite games of the year and one of my favorite games of the generation. And this whole scenario, I think, applies to a lot of the games. Obviously, Animal Crossing was huge during this time of the pandemic, whether it be playing by yourself or visiting other people's islands and stuff like that. And it was cool to see video games become this outlet for so many people. And it goes beyond just people like us here, that whether it's a listener to the show or, Chris and Colin, in that we saw this meteoric rise of people wanting to play video games. And I think what's so cool about that is that I think that there were people that picked up gaming because they were off of work or whatever due to the pandemic. And I'm willing to bet that many of them are going to stick around and realize, like, wow, this is actually not what I expected video games to be like now. And they're hooked. So I just love that not only it provided comfort to the people that needed it, but it also brought new people into this community that we love so much.
Yeah, very well said. I feel like it was a great showcase for our, an unfortunate showcase, but a great showcase nonetheless for our hobby. Chris, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that was pretty. I think it was pretty on point. I think it really was the big, like, entertainment medium that really kind of, like, stepped up to bat. I feel like. I think. I mean, obviously, it's uniquely tailored to kind of be perfect for a situation like this, but I do think it was really nice. Like, I had a lot of friends who who I used to play, like, a lot of video games with, and, like, just for some reason just haven't played in recent years, who, thanks to the pandemic, they're, like, working from home, they have more time, that I started playing with them again. I started, like, reconnecting with people through, like, Destiny 2, and now it's just become, like, this routine, and it's like, oh, how great that we kind of stumbled onto this kind of really positive way to kind of socialize and just sort of hang out without actually hanging out in person. And this wouldn't have happened without a world-destroying disease.
Indeed.
So,
a world-wrecking pandemic brought us all together.
Yeah, that's what it takes to get me to hang out with my friends, apparently.
Yeah, me too. God, man, I just can't get over the serendipity and the timing of my move from California to here, because I really was just like a month ahead of all of this happening, and I wonder what would have happened if this I would be fucking miserable in California probably still right now. So glad I got out of there, even with the video games to keep us all busy here. So Chris, let's keep it with you. You have two more choices to talk about. Which one do you want to talk about?
Yeah, I feel like one I want to save specifically for my last one, so I'll talk about this because it's also surprised me, even though it wasn't necessarily a big splash in the industry as a whole. But the fact that they made a genuine sequel to an old Crash Bandicoot trilogy, the original Naughty Dog Crash Bandicoot trilogy, and it ended up being genuinely great was a moment for me that made me genuinely like really happy. It's very rare that like a beloved IP like that gets handed off to just a studio and it's done well. I mean, I think that happened immediately after Naughty Dog left that series. They handed it off to like some other studio for Crash Bash, and then like when the Xbox and PS2 came out, it was like Wrath of Cortex and like Twinsanity and all these like really weird like Mind Over Mutant and all these like really weird like kind of like just terrible offshoots that just completely missed the point of like why those games were so beloved and enjoyed. And I'm really glad the Insane trilogy did it as well as it did, because I'm pretty certain without it you wouldn't have this genuinely fantastic platformer that feels like it's ripped out of the 90s in like a really modern way. Like it feels just as challenging as those old games. It feels just as sweaty and it feels just as like, oh man, I bet I could get every box if I like really just tried. It really tickles that part of your brain that I feel like I feel like a lot of newer games don't really tickle. And to see that back and done so well by a studio that didn't even make the remakes, it's just really shocking. And it doesn't happen often, and I was just really happy to see. I'm just happy to see Crash Bandicoot back in the public consciousness as a mascot, just as a beloved gaming character. Because just seeing the rumors of people like being like, I want him in Smash Brothers. It's just so nice.
Yeah, I know this last few years has been perfect for you. How do you feel about that, Dustin?
You know, I've been listening to Chris talk about this game for the past, few episodes of this show, and I really want to play it. When it came out, it was at a bad time, and I thought I'll wait for now, but Crash holds a very special place in my heart. It was the very first game I owned on the original PlayStation, and it's honestly kind of embarrassing that I don't have this game and I haven't played it yet. So this might have to be one that I play over our little Christmas break if I can fit it in.
I do have to mimic kind of what Chris is saying here, which is just the general rise of, or re-rise, I should say. It's like the third or fourth rising of platform mascots, or mascot platformers rather, has been awesome. And you saw it with like Lucky's Tale, and there was that like Snake game or whatever it was, and there were a few others from the indie space, and then you had the Magic Hat game or whatever the fuck it was called, Hat in Time. I'm like my dad talking about video games. But it's been really cool to see this kind of come back, because I actually saw a trailer for New Lucky's Tale today. I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about this game. This game just looks like something I want to play. It's very similar to when I sat down in 2018 and played the Spyro trilogy. It was awesome. It was just it's exactly what I needed. And Crash is not really my thing. It's a little too hard for me for a platformer. Yeah, I like my 2D sprite-based platformers, so it's not super focused at me, but nonetheless, I feel like it's a great choice. An obvious choice for Chris to bring up here on our show as well.
It's just so rare that happens with old characters. Yeah, like it's not all that uncommon that an old genre might like resurge. Like we've seen like obviously like a lot of 2D platformers like explode onto the scene. Like I think like Celeste and The Messenger come to mind as like really great examples of modern franchises or modern games that kind of borrow elements from like really old kind of dead genres. But I really like, aside from like maybe like, I don't know, Doom Guy, I guess, maybe it's very rare that like a character like that has like just a fucking terrible career for like nearly 15 years and then just comes back and is just like beloved again. It's just weird.
I feel like Sony has a little bit to do with this too, because I feel like the rumblings of Crash Bandicoot coming back and kind of being brought back for a new generation really began about 8 years ago when PlayStation All-Stars came out, and people kind of wondering, where's Crash? And Activision kind of having to speak out about this, and kind of Sony clarifying they never really own the character. And
yeah,
whatever the case might be, I think that it kind of started to brew there, and then people were like, yeah, Crash Bandicoot. And right, like I said early on in our show, in our run back in 2018, I didn't anticipate anyone gave a fuck about Crash. So I was just radically wrong about that. And the proof's in the pudding, because not only are these games coming out and selling well, they're reviewing really well. So we haven't seen the last of Crash, and we've certainly not seen the last of Spyro either.
Yeah,
I do not think. All right. I have two more here. We haven't brought up Vita yet, and that's unusual. So I wanted to bring up Vita. And I just put here in the list, Vita's continued survival. This thing is getting old. This time next year, the Vita will have been 10 years old. 10 years old.
Wow.
And it's still getting games made for it. I was just looking at PSN profiles earlier today. A lot of these games are that like the Retallica, whatever the hell that publisher's called, the cheap trophy games. But every once in a while, a game comes to Vita, and there's actually quite a few games that came to Vita this year that were really good. Xenocrisis, which is a Genesis game, being one of those games, fantastic on Vita. And at least I really liked it on Vita. I don't know if everyone likes their twin stick shooting like I do. And of course, we released Twin Breaker on Vita earlier this year, where it sold best. That's the piece of hardware where it sold the most. So I just got to give it up to not Sony, who's been trying to kill it for many years, but to everyone out there that's been keeping this thing alive. And having released a game on Vita this year and releasing another one in February on Vita, I've kind of come to learn a little bit more about this really hardcore community of Vita gamers, because I've been at the forefront, the phalanx of Vita support in the industry since the very beginning, and I think everyone knows that. But underneath the surface is a group of people that play every Vita game, that buy every physical Vita game, that create their own publications for each other and their own YouTube videos. And it's a small community of podcasters and everything else, but they exist and they buy games on Vita, and we hear from them. And I just love this machine, and I just continue to hope against hope that Sony doesn't abandon the dream of not a second Vita, but of a third Sony handheld. And I feel like the success of Switch is just the proof that they need. I just hope that they don't cede this space. I know that it's easy to say, well, play on your phone with a controller, hook up your DualSense to your iPad. It's like, well, it's not really the same. And so I hope that they don't walk away from this dream. But in the meantime, I wake up every single day expecting that Sony is finally going to pull the plug on this thing. And it's actually a great mystery why they haven't. I don't know that they're making that much money on this machine. I mean, our game probably sold more than almost any Vita game that came out this year. And I can tell you that it's not enough to support a studio. So I don't know, just props to Vita, which is just stuck around for so very long. And it's not one of those foreign overseas examples. We often talk about Brazil, for instance, keeping a lot of old Sega hardware alive for a really long time because of really onerous embargoes there. It's different. Vita just exists. They don't even make them anymore, except for you have to import them to even get a new one. And you see things like PlayStation TV, they're worth like hundreds of dollars. There's just this weird, I don't know, guys, just this weird Vita ecosystem, and I've always been a part of it. So I wanted to give a shout out to it. Vita continues. Hopefully this time next year when we do another one of these episodes, we'll talk about how it's still going 10 years on. So anything that you guys wanted to say, Chris or Dustin, about Vita? I know I talk about it too much.
Yeah, like Vita's a really cool machine. Like I know I've said this at really, really kind of like over and over again. I've made a point to say this on like Twitch and on like everywhere that I can at least once, that the PS Vita has my favorite. And I think probably I'm you know what, I'm gonna say it. The PS Vita is the best place to play the Metal Gear Solid collection. Like, it just is. Like those ports that I think Blue Point made, right?
Yep,
Metal Gear Solid.
Yep.
Those versions of the game are like, I think, the best versions of those games to play. Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3 play best on Vita, which is insane. Like, I did not expect that to be the case, but it just, like, the way they integrate the touch controls that seem like they could be annoying but just work is just so goddamn nice, and it's genuinely better than the original PS2 releases of these like incredible games, and it just makes me love those games even more than I did before. And I didn't even think that was possible. I don't know, man. It's just it's my dedicated Metal Gear Solid machine, and I love it.
The Vita will always hold a very fond place in my heart, whether it's because of the like amazing JRPG support on it, and just overall, it's just it feels like such a premium piece of hardware. It always has, and I feel like it hopefully always will. I mean, I think even now it still feels way more premium than the Switch does. So I want to echo what you said, Colin, in that I hope that Sony is able to figure out what a PlayStation handheld in its current landscape looks like. Because I think that there's some middle ground where it doesn't need to be this insanely ambitious, you can play AAA games on it. Something more along the lines of Switch, where they could get, some kind of level of crossplay between select PS5 games. I don't know exactly what it looks like, but I think that it's clear that there's something still there.
Certainly. I think there certainly is. And you're right. Like, is it the AAA space? I don't know. It works for Nintendo Switch, but it really only works for Switch in the first party. It's really an indie game machine and a smaller game machine. And I wonder if Sony should have just embraced that from the beginning, because they were so schizophrenic with remember the commercials for Vita on TV, console quality gaming on the go. Right. And then they just walked away from that. We haven't had a console quality game on Vita from first party in 6 years. I would say Freedom Wars was the last time that we ever got something like that. So it is somehow hobbled on without it. And you see little things every once in a while where it seems like they're trying to kill Vita, or at least piss people off to stop using Vita, like where they just search just doesn't work anymore on the store for like 2 weeks or something like that on the Vita store, which just happened.
I saw that in New Zealand or something.
It was everywhere.
Okay.
But it was, like you couldn't find anything on the Vita storefront. But then the PSP storefront still works. So it's like you could still download your PSP games. So they're not going to like just get rid of it. It's just I really wonder what the last release is going to be on it when they're finally like, enough, guys. And if I can be one of those games to be the last. Yeah. If Lilymo will continue to release games on Vita until we're no longer allowed. So we'll release one in 5 years if they'll let us. And it's very similar to V-Blank. You know, that the guy, Brian Provinciano, the guy that does Shakedown Hawaii and all those games, like he like ports his games to everything, and he ported his game to PSP and stuff. I think that's cool. So yeah, we'll do a similar thing, I think. All right, Dustin, let's kick it over to you for your last one.
Yeah, so my last one is just the new hardware launches. And I think that applies to PlayStation 5, Series X, and even for me, the new line of graphics cards from NVIDIA. But there's something special about new console launches, and I think you guys can probably agree with me that like I feel like I at least have some small memory of the day I've received a console. Like I can remember very vividly the Christmas that I got the PlayStation 2. It was in a used GameStop box, and I didn't have a game when I got it, but it was something like I got it on Christmas Eve at my grandma's house, and I had games coming the next day. But it came with a copy of Armageddon on DVD, and this applies to all the consoles. Like Xbox 360, I wasn't able to get it on Christmas Day, but it was a few weeks later at a Target we found one. And so to have a new addition to those memories is always exciting. This year was the strangest for sure, in that like everyone else, it just got delivered to my house. But I remember that this was weird because I was expecting it to come in the afternoon, and it ended up coming at like 10 a.m. And something about the way that we scheduled it came when I was working on Knockback. And so I was like, listen, I need to just focus, finish editing Knockback, and then you can open it up. So it was a little stressful in that moment, but it all worked out. But I just like the fact that these are important moments in our lives for people that love this hobby. And so the other side of that I just wanted to touch on real quick is that what particularly is exciting to me about this generation is the focus on performance. And that's something that I've wanted for a lot of years. And we're seeing a huge initiative from Microsoft also, but from Sony first party, and seeing that not only is performance and getting 60 FPS very important, but giving consumers options. And I have to shout out right now to Insomniac that they really went the extra mile and incorporated that 60 FPS ray tracing mode after launch, giving a third graphics option. And so as someone who really cares about that aspect of gaming, it's cool to see that strong initiative at launch, and I just really hope we see it continue through the entire generation.
Yeah, no, I love it. This is really the type of console experience that I've wanted for a very, very long time is now finally here, where I can finally like tailor these options the way that I want them to, and with just enough specificity that, you know, I can have the experience that I want, but I don't have to get lost in like, 4 times anti-aliasing, you know, like PC options menus can be like pretty overwhelming, especially when like a lot of it, like
I might be like technologically illiterate in this way, but like I see a lot of these PC options, and I'm like, I don't even really know what this does. Like I turn on and off like chromatic aberration or whatever the fuck, and I'm like, I don't know what the fuck I just turned on. So it's nice to just kind of have the beauty of a console is the simplicity and the ease of access, and to have that simplicity and ease of access kind of that philosophy kind of introduced into like graphics options and being like, hey, you know what? Here's performance, here's quality, and in Spider-Man's case, here's like a mix of both, and that's it. And it's like that's perfect. That's all I want. That's all I want is the ability to play something at high res or just to play something at fast frame rates, and then I'm good. I don't care about all this other shit. You know, just make it look good, and we're golden. But no, I love it. This is the I think for that reason alone, this generation is probably going to be a really great one. But you know, even just to what Dustin was saying before, like, yeah, having a new machine is just always exciting, especially because you never really know what the last one of these is going to be. You know, like this could be the last. Like, it's very possible. Like, this could be the last real new PlayStation that we unbox. I'm sure that they might make a PlayStation 6, but that would, I don't know, like maybe. Or they
far
could just,
away. Yeah, it's far. If they do, it's far away. I mean, who knows? I'm still of the mind that we'll be playing on TVs or something like that.
Yeah, or even just like if they just make stronger PS5s, because the market says like, hey, you know, it's just this machine's pretty strong. Let's just make slightly stronger versions of it throughout the years, just like how phones are doing it. And I think that's how Xbox is doing it. Honestly, like I think this is technically the last new generation Xbox. I think everything after this is gonna be like Series whatever, or Series blank, Series X, Series Z, whatever the fuck you want to call it, but it's going to be fundamentally the same machine, just stronger and faster. And so it's just cool to open these machines and just kind of have another one of those memories. I remember like some of my fondest memories about video games, honestly, like aren't even necessarily about the video games. It's just about opening these friggin' machines on Christmas Day or like my birthday and being like, oh shit, this is sick. I get to play Spider-Man for the original Xbox, and I get to swing off the clouds and in HD. 720p. This is crazy.
You're absolutely right. First of all, Chris, I gotta say that I was thinking, not that you're a Fortnite fan, I'm quite the opposite, but I was thinking about you because I saw that they unleashed, I think, the patch for PS5 Fortnite where it's running at 120 frames now, and I it's just so funny because I'm like, we couldn't even get games to run at 60 frames not very long ago, so we do seem to be getting a quantum leap in performance, which is really cool. And like I said, right, like I've become more of a believer in what you guys have been preaching for a long time about performance. It's just I did become a believer of it finally. I think
it's wonderful. Yeah, it's noticeable, man. Like once you see it back to back, man, it's like it's really hard to go back to that kind of 30 frames. It really is. Even when you adjust to it and it starts to look okay, the second you switch back, it's like, oh my god, like 60 is so nice.
The question now remains is like, will I ever really play a game in 30 frames again unless I'm going backwards, right? That's kind of funny. Like that's the kind of funny situation to think about is, have we kind of left this behind and it will become much more quaint moving forward? I was even seeing something with The Witcher 3 where if you unpatch The Witcher 3, it'll run at 60 frames. So there might be a way to brute force a lot of this stuff too that we don't know, like the older games in forward compatibility, but I don't know. I don't know how it's all going to work, but I'm happy for everyone that's all about performance and certainly opened my eyes a little bit. Hey, this year I had to really learn a lot about technology that I really never had to, because when consoles and units launched in my previous life at IGN, we had people that were I was the expert in games, right? We had experts in tech. And so kind of having to, I'm still a Luddite, but having to learn a little bit more and watching for the first time really something like Digital Foundry and stuff. It was exciting. It was interesting. It was a totally different perspective for me. Digital
Foundry is so fast. Like I don't know any, like half the time I'll watch those videos and I won't know what the fuck they're saying, but it is still so interesting just to see how they break shit down. Everybody should check that shit out if they're interested in tech. Honestly, it's interesting and relaxing, weirdly enough.
Yeah, those guys know tech like I know fucking. So
damn.
All right, Chris, let's go to you for your last one.
Yeah, so I don't think there's any way to talk about video games in 2020 without really addressing this, even if it's not on PlayStation. I'm sure it will be at some point because this thing is exploding, and I have reason to believe that it's probably going to stick around at least for a while. And that's just the explosion of Among Us, and just this this little video game, this little Flash video game, just blowing up in 2020, the year of our Lord and Savior, 2020.
Yeah.
That is so crazy to me. Like, if you told me, like, even in 2015, like, hey, bro, in 5 years, a Flash game, you know, is going to be, like, probably, like, the most played game on the planet. I'd be like, yeah, sure, yeah, that's fine. I'm sure that's real. Alien Hominid, you know, like, and Super Meat Boy and all these different, like, even just the smaller Flash games on Addicting Games back in the day, and all these, like, weird little offshoot websites like Amish Donkey and Albino Black Sheep, like, and Newgrounds. Obviously, you can't not mention Newgrounds when you're talking about Flash animated games, but those used to be, like, a really common thing on the internet, and, like, even on Xbox Live Arcade back in the day, and, like, PSN. Like, you would see these Flash games occasionally, and then, like, after a while, they just sort of stopped, and, like, they didn't happen anymore. And I think there were, like, a few studios who were still doing it. I think the company that made Battle Block Theater, the Behemoth, was still making stuff, and that was always nice, but it always felt like this kind of, like, throwback to kind of like a bygone era where it was like, it's almost like retro games, you know, where it's like, oh yeah, here's Flash games. But what was so interesting is that just this game comes out and it's a Flash game, and it didn't dawn on me until recently, but, like, yeah, there's probably, like, a whole generation of players who probably weren't even cognizant of video games back when these types of games were, like, super popular and super prevalent, who are, like, now being introduced to this style through this. And not only is it this old kind of style of game, but it's also modern in the way that it focuses on multiplayer and communication, and even and just, oh yeah, hey, like, go on Discord and, like, use it with all these different apps, and it's the most accessible a complicated game can be, I think. And, you know, I think it's the reason why it's exploded and become such a cultural phenomenon. I really think it's unavoidably, like, it probably is Game of the Year this year. You know what I mean?
It's certainly the game that, well, weren't we talking about it a week or two ago? Like, AOC and all these politicians were playing it, or whatever, raising monies and doing all sorts of stuff. It does seem like it's a cultural phenomenon. My little nephews were the ones that introduced me to it. I never even heard of it.
Yeah. It's funny because, like, I remember at the beginning of this year, I thought it was going to be Fall Guys, you know, because Fall Guys had this, like, pretty big, this meteoric rise for a minute, and then up comes this little Flash game.
Yeah, that was out for a while. So that's what's so interesting about it. Dustin, have you played this one?
Yeah, this has actually been a favorite in the CLS Discord. We've done a couple of, like, community game nights that have been really fun with this game. But Chris, I really like you bringing up about it being a Flash game, because you and I are kind of like the Flash generation as far as, like, you can remember playing, like, Interactive Buddy, whether when you're in 6th grade in the computer lab or something like that, through V-Tunnel or something. And so
that is a weirdly specific example that I exactly relate to. That is exactly in 6th grade, exactly in the computer lab, exactly Interactive Buddy. That's fucking really bizarre.
Yeah, exactly. So it's cool to see this tradition continue, especially right now. We're seeing the death of Flash before our very eyes as far as on a web browser. But
yeah.
And I think the other thing that's just cool, it's always heartwarming to me, and I think that this applies to both Among Us and Fall Guys this year, is that I love seeing really small teams just have a surprise hit and take over the world with their game. And not only is it cool that they can be proud of something that has captivated so many people, but they're all freaking millionaires now. Like, they're set for life and they can do whatever they want, and that's just so cool to me. I'm always happy when I see that kind of success story.
Yeah, it's always really, like, kind of heartwarming to see that, especially, like, when they were at the Game Awards and it was, like, just these 4 people
who made this thing. And it reminded me a lot of I can't remember his name, but the guy who made Unravel when he was up on stage at E3.
Oh yeah, and he was, like, shaking.
Yeah, and he was, like, shaking, and you could tell he was nervous, but it was like strangely, like, humanizing and, like, really kind of heartwarming to see him up there and being, like, really excited about this thing that he worked on and, like, presenting it to people, even though, like, you could tell he was, like, nervous and kind of, like, not prepared. It just made it, like, all the more relatable. And I felt a very similar emotion when I was watching those guys, like, accept their awards. Like, oh my god, like they couldn't help themselves but be excited. And it's just so nice to see that coming from, like, just a small team that's, you know, not only kind of keeping this legacy tradition of, like, Flash games alive, but doing it in such a way that's so uniquely their own. And by the way, just like how therapeutic a game like that and Fall Guys can be when, we're locked away and not necessarily able to hang out with, the people that we enjoy or the company that we normally keep. It's really cool that we have these kind of simpler games that are accessible to anybody that kind of people can jump into and kind of have that social experience and kind of at the hands of just these 4 people. It's just really cool.
It is neat, and at the time of which we're recording this, it was just announced for Switch, so it's going to be coming, I think, to PlayStation probably next year, and we'll see how that all works out. Too bad Vita's not alive, or it would be really good there as well.
Yeah, it'd be a great Vita game. It's because it's coming to Switch. It was just announced, I think, also for Xbox Game Pass for PC. So like that's a whole nother fucking. I'm sure they got a hefty chunk of change. Like it's just so nice to see that game do well.
All right, boys, good selections. My final one here is just that Final Fantasy 16 was announced.
Yeah,
I feel like I'm in kind of the area in my career and in my life where I don't really get too excited about seeing any game in a preview setting, as I said earlier, and even game announcements. I remain skeptical because how many times can a person be burned, especially when you do it for a living? You just kind of learn to keep your excitement limited, and you're pleasantly surprised when those expectations are exceeded. And Final Fantasy 16 looks fucking awesome. I don't know how else to put it. I just conclusively think it looks awesome. And what I'm really excited about is that Unit 3 over at Square Enix doesn't really have very exciting studio names, but their Unit 3 studio is the one that's making this, and they're the guys that are behind Final Fantasy 14. I actually, Naoki Yoshida is the producer and director of Final Fantasy 14, and he's producing Final Fantasy 16, and that actually makes me feel pretty good because Final Fantasy 14 is incredibly well respected, and people really love that game. And I'm thrilled that the same old people, the same old leaders are not, Nomura and Katase and all these guys are just not involved. I love those guys. They've contributed a lot to what makes Square Enix great and Squaresoft great back in the day, but it's over now. And now a new generation of Final Fantasy begins. And that one shot of the main character fighting what looks like a Marlboro in like the swamp that they released, like the gameplay, looks fucking insane. I mean, the game looks so good, and I love that it's going back to what seems to be a fantasy setting fused with some technology. So maybe something a little bit like Final Fantasy IV kind of gave me that vibe. Just seeing them, I remember I'm watching it by myself, but when you see them riding chocobos in the beginning, I'm like, is this Final Fantasy 16? And it was, and I guess I just didn't expect it this quick, although when you really think about it, it's been 5 years since Final Fantasy 15 came out, so why wouldn't we be expecting this? And it's announced only for PlayStation 5 right now, which is really interesting, and it's not coming out next year, I doubt, but it looks awesome. And I just want to give a shout out to Square Enix because I think they've had a rough go of it in some ways, especially with what happened with Avengers. That was, of course, their fault that happened, but
yeah,
what's going on with their Japanese development, whether you're talking about Automata and the new Nier game, or you're talking about Final Fantasy and what's going on with Dragon Quest and some of the Musous they're making with Omega Force, I think they're kind of firing on all cylinders, and I'm really excited about this game. Do you guys have, we'll go to Dustin first. Dustin, you're a Final Fantasy nerd, right?
Yeah.
So,
I'm also really excited about this. And Colin, I think you hit the nail on the head in the fact that we've got new blood, not new, so to say. These guys are experienced. We know that they were on the Final Fantasy 14 team, but as far as taking over a core mainline non-MMO Final Fantasy game, it's exciting. And it's especially exciting for me because I have really mixed feelings about Final Fantasy 15. Like, it's unfortunate. I feel like I would have had a better experience if I would have waited until they added all the new story stuff, just because it's a little bit conflicting about the fact that they didn't really have the game fully finished in a way when it came out. And so I'm just excited to see them go full force on this new game with new talent. And it's especially exciting too, just because we saw Square Enix in the PS3 generation kind of try to Americanize themselves in certain ways. And so last generation, like you were saying, was a really good return to form as far as their Japanese development side. And so I'm just hoping that we get more of that going forward.
me too. Chris, does this do anything for you as someone who's not really into Japanese role-playing games, although this seems to be more of an action RPG.
Yeah, I mean, it looks gorgeous, but like I can't pretend to be like super excited about it. You know, like it's I'll have to see a little bit more of it. I do like Final Fantasy VII, and it looks like it's not necessarily borrowing a lot from that, but it definitely looks like it plays a lot similarly, like, or at least in some regard, like similarly.
You mean the remake? Yeah,
the
definitely.
remake. I mean,
yeah. Definitely
more action oriented. So like, and I like the gameplay in Final Fantasy VII. So like maybe like it could potentially, but I'm not it's not like on my radar necessarily. 4 screws just fell out of my chair. My God.
Oh geez. All right. Well, we're 2020
it's okay.
just keeps
it's been shedding screws for a while. This thing's really close to dead.
Well, just throw it in the dumpster when you move out of there. All
Yeah.
right. Well, those are our selected 15 choices, 5 each, but there are a few more I wanted to read from the audience, just real quick. We can go quickly with these. Andy Capt and Saul Nolasco both wrote in about things that happened on the show, so I just wanted to give a quick shout out to these. Andy Capt says, best moment, guy who shit his pants on a date.
Yes.
Those were good stories. I haven't heard from that guy in a while. I don't remember his name, but if you're listening to this, and you probably are, write into us and let us know how that's all going. Saul Nolasco wrote in and said, good day, gentlemen. The best memory about 2020 doesn't even have to do with a game. It just certainly has to do with Stone Cold Steve 316. I've never in my life heard Austin 316 get botched so bad. I had a great kick out of that and would totally rock that shirt. I think we want to sell a shirt like that, but I got to figure out what we can do legally with that, since I'm sure he owns all that stuff. But yeah, I'm glad people thought that was funny as well. Chris, you brought up Fall Guys earlier, and so Clark Petrie wrote in and said, hey, fellas, I really need to give some love to Fall Guys. The game was a sensation and personally hit during a dark period for me, bringing some much-needed silliness. I adore the game and thoroughly played the first 2 seasons. While I can tell I'm largely done with it, partially due to a bullshit trophy which will preclude me earning the platinum. The game holds a special place in my heart for the whimsical spirit it brought into my life. So there we go with that. Joshua McGee wanted to give a shout-out to his backlog, which is something I want to give a shout out to as well. He says, hey, Colin and Chris, being unemployed for most of 2020, this year was a nice opportunity to go back and finish some of my backlog. I finished games like Dark Souls Remastered, Catherine Full Body, Time Spinner, good choice, and Ori and the Blind Forest. However, my most memorable experience from 2020 is playing Bayonetta, the first Bayonetta on PC. My God, I slept on this game for so long, and I just love how ridiculous and over the top it is. Still kicking myself for not playing it 10 years ago. God, what a game. Hope you both have a Merry Christmas. Of course, that came out at the same time as the superior game Vanquish. That was released earlier this year, re-released earlier this year. Dustin, this one's for you. Straw Hat Ninja wrote in and said, hello, gentlemen. My number one moment in gaming for 2020 is that Trails of Cold Steel is finally finished. It took me 349 hours to finish all 4 games after many years of waiting. The final game got localized this year. These are the games that you forever instructed me are the budget Persona games.
I actually think I've made fun of Straw Hat Ninja in our Discord for how much he likes these games, so I can't be too nice here.
All right, well, I understand that completely. Nimbus gave a shout out, and so did Philip Anderson. Nimbus gave a shout out to Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated, the SpongeBob game, which I totally forgot. That game did kind of silently come out, and it was supposed to be pretty good.
Yeah,
if you're into that. And then Philip Anderson talks about Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2, which sold really well, but I feel like no one's talking about it.
It actually won a game award, like during the show. It won like.
Oh, did it? I was muting it whenever they weren't showing games.
Yeah, it was like it won like it's such a weird category. But it was like sports / sim or something. It was against like FIFA and shit. And I remember being like, oh shit, that's definitely like FIFA or whatever the fuck. And then it was just Tony Hawk, and I was like, oh my God. That's really cool. I think the remakes this year have been pretty stellar. Like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, I think Bikini Bottom turned out pretty well. I really enjoyed Destroy All Humans as well. I actually have a video that I'm working on about Destroy All Humans. But yeah, it's been a good year for those kinds of like middle market kind of resurgence type games.
Definitely, I'm so excited to see the resurgence of that space, especially with the price of games going up on the top end. There's a really attractive space now between $30 and $50 that I think publishers can explore, so we'll keep an eye out on that. And then finally, and this is a big one, although I think it needs its own episode. I don't want to be flippant about it, but Stephen Forgione wrote in and said, hey, CNC, and possibly D. For me, I'd say the most important moment of 2020 is the accountability of gaming companies throughout the industry. While we did have long-form articles on crunch at CD Projekt Red and Naughty Dog, I would say the biggest story of the year is Ubisoft's internal shuffling due to impropriety. At Ubisoft, internal and external investigations were made, and the proprietors of impropriety, or perpetrators of impropriety, were quickly removed, including top-level members of the company and leads on multiple staple Ubisoft franchises. While not as glamorous a topic by any stretch, it is important to remember that these companies employ human beings and should be treated with the same respect we want for ourselves. With Ubisoft conducting internal and external investigations into their own company's behavior, more employees at other developers and publishers may have increased confidence to report any acts of impropriety at their own employer, knowing that these reports will lead to investigations that will right the wrongs occurring in the workplace. Hopefully these incidents never happened to begin with, but it's good to hear that one company is managing to try to do what's right by its workers to prevent hostile work environments. Hope all is well. Here's to a happy and healthy holiday and new year. Thank you, Stephen. So, of course, this was a big story as well this year and something worth noting as well, although I don't want to just in passing talk about it, but just the level of accountability led by Ubisoft, I think will make the industry a better place for everybody. So
yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. So otherwise, boys, a very nice show here for the holiday season for Christmas. A little look back on 2020. The next episode we're going to put up is a 2021 preview where we'll identify our favorite or most, well, not I want to say favorite, but the games we're looking forward to the most. That'll be a fun one. And then we'll cruise right back into normal episodes beginning in January. So please look forward to it. Chris, thank you for coming by today. I know that you're busy over there staying warm in California, and we have a lot of episodes actually to record this week. So
yeah, we do. It's time to pedal to the metal,
Yeah, so I appreciate you as always, and Dustin, I appreciate you as well. Thanks for stopping in.
Sure, of course.
Your presence is always delightful. So thank you all out there for your love, kindness, and support. Happy holidays, happy new year from all of us here, and please tell your friends and family about Sacred Symbols. Share our show. Support us on Patreon if you can. Patreon.com/CollinsLastStand. We'll see you next time for more Sacred Symbols. Until then, goodbye.
Take care, guys.
Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is a product of and a registered trademark of Collins Last Stand, LLC, and is recorded from Richmond, Virginia, and Burbank, California, USA. This show is conceived by, is written by, and is produced by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-host is Chris Raygun. You can find me on Twitter at NoTaxation and on Instagram at CLS Moriarty. Chris is on Twitter at Chris R. Gunn and on Instagram at Chris_Ray_Gun. Sacred Symbols is edited by Dustin Furman. To message the show online, please use Patreon's DM service. As you know, all of Collins Last Stand shows, including Sacred Symbols, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/CollinsLastStand. The following names are at the producer level or higher on Patreon, and we are eternally grateful for your kindness, generosity, and fandom. Nick DeMarco, Andrew Morgan, Gregory Slavinsky, Stephen Nieder, Ross Marenka, Zach Parsley, Miguel A. Brewer, Morgan Ashley, Ben, Azan, Michael Vecchio, Joey Finelli, Jerome Ferreira, SL the FMA, Ryan T. Mandel, Jorge Palomino, Enrique Perez, Don Lee, Daniel Diamore, Brad Cooley, Jeremy Key, Patrick Leslie, Homeworld Hub, Dennis Barker, William Holbert, Chris Buston, Betty Ann Moriarty, Colin Jewell, Daniel Johnson, Zach Bonham, an Unofficial Controller Podcast, Jay Getter, Vexius, Jeff Mercado, Galja of Fortuna, Boots, Megadet, Saul Balcazar, Raul Melendez, Jackson Vernon, Eric Harden, Matt Martin, Rodney Coleman, Chris Moore, Auntie Kinnanen, Taylor Barkley, Chris Galvin, Ryan Murdoch, Mason Cadillac, Ollie Fritz, Chris Buston, Zach Allum, George Anthony Nunez, Kyle Hagel, Colin Love, Daryl E. Naiman, Ryan R. Kittredge, Toby Ryland, Michael S., Damon Weathers, Richter 86, Barrett Boswell, Christopher DeVio, Kevin Kamaki, Blake Israel, Sean Mason, Josh Gravelick, Brian Chan, Organic Produce, Isaac Wastman, Mubarak, Carlos Algrit, McDog 18, Richard Hebert III, Miranda Grubba, Ray Leja, David Castanez, Donnie Nolan, Josh Yeager, Matthew Cooper, Toothless Gibbon, Martin Beck, Gavin, Joey Andrzejczyk, Nathan R., Joe McPartland, Christopher Moore, Lawrence F. Prokop, Colin Davenport, Eric Finkenbeiner, Lou and Ray Loper, Dylan Burns, John Schultz, David Chestnut, Yusuf, Anton K., Alan Tremblay, Tyler Bello, Tony Zaniga, Sean Battershaw, Max Lazos, Robbie Hensley, Alex Cabrera, Lennon Brixey, Corey Wyatt, James Kinslow III, Hugo's Desk, Peter Reynolds, William O'Carroll, JCS0828, Jesper Jansen, Phil Crone, Throw 7, Adam Nix, Josh McKinney, Michael Gates, Alex Gates, Sean Chandler, Petro Rose, Gio Corsi, Greg Lotta, Gerald Pennington, Justin Wagaman, Paul Joyce, Chad Lewis, Todd Paxson, Joshua Smallwood, Shane Reum, Spencer Brand, John Cordero, Greg Juliffs, Keith A. Lewis, Marius Garson Peterson, Tyler Harris, Matthew Purdue, Toby Shootman, Patrick Harper, Mad Mock Media, Jonathan Rice, and Casual Misfits Gaming.